And welcome back to the Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity. We're talking with Ralph White. So, Ralph, you had that experience in Findhorn. You also had you were involved in the Omega Institute in the early days.
Yeah, that's right.
What kind of drew you into the idea of starting a spiritual learning center here in New York City?
Well, I had been involved in really running the programs and the first 2 summers at Omega Institute up in Rhinebeck there, the big old abandoned summer camp, Camp Boybrick as it then was, and getting that going from scratch. But I really wasn't cut out for living in upstate. So it was actually through a synchronicity, you might say, through those of our listeners. Of course, we've got listeners all over the world, so it'll only be a small minority. But there's a lake at Omega Institute, and before the place had even opened, I met somebody there who I recognized from Scotland, from Findhorn years earlier. And he told me about somebody down in New York City who he and a few other people had a general idea of creating some kind of a center in New York City that could be a real focal point for this kind of new thinking, new perspectives, new values, new practices. So this Australian guy, basically set up a dinner to meet with this person whose name was Walter Beebe. He was a lawyer. And we connected, to cut a long story short, and we turned out to have a good balance of skills, and that I had the contacts, the vision, and the know-how to actually run a center.
Right.
And Walter had a background in law and business and real estate and things like that, and obviously we shared a vision here. And so actually it was on Christmas Day, 1982, the only Christmas day he and I have ever worked. We decided to work together, and that I'd start working on it on March the 1st. I figured it would, March the 1st, 83, I figured it would take us about 9 months to get it launched from scratch. I had to go back and run the summer programs at Omega that summer of 93. Sorry, I'm getting the 80. It was 83. And then we actually launched. So I had a crazy year where I was doing both Omega and the Open Center in 83. And then we launched the Open Center and that unforgettable date. It was January. It was a freezing January night. And it was Friday the 13th, 1984, with all its Orwellian overtones. In the place they said it could never be done because, of course, the conventional wisdom all those years ago was, get out of here. This is the real world. This is New York. We remember what New York was like 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
It was mayhem. So it felt like a bit of a wild venture. But it also felt that New York City really needed a focal point where we could bring in the finest presenters from all over the country, all over the world, and really present a coherent, well thought out, rigorous approach to the holistic worldview, because of course it was being dismissed as sort of new age flakiness and so on, left, right and center, as if, meditation was a fancy word for sleep and this kind of thing, and alternative medicine. The New York Times was still publishing editorials dismissing every form of alternative medicine as snake oil, etc. So we had a long way to go. And when I look at where we are today and how ubiquitous holistic things are, whether it's natural foods or whether it's yoga or mindfulness meditation, it's a phenomenal change. But yes, 30 odd years ago, 33 years ago, it was a pioneering endeavor. But absolutely. I had the contacts and I had the energy. I was only 34 years old. And
well, is there a point over those last 30 some odd years that you feel was the turning point for the Open Center, that really you felt like the Open Center has arrived, that now you were taken maybe more seriously, or that there was really like you knew it was going to thrive, and that now it was really no longer a struggle, but now it was thriving instead of just surviving?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure has ever fully reached that point. I can say that as soon as the Open Center appeared, it was greeted with an enormous wave of gratitude and appreciation. I remember our opening event at Cooper Union, which was launching a Paul Winter album. There were 900 people or so in that audience. There was just a huge wave of gratitude. So I think from the holistic community, from people attuned to these kinds of values, there's always been appreciation and energy. We're still waiting for the New York Times to write an article about us. They've scrupulously ignored us, even though they now run articles twice a week about meditation or renewable energy or whatever it is that comes from the holistic and ecological worldview. So I think we've still got a way to go before the mainstream fully embraces what we stand for. But I think it's a story that's off the mainstream media radar. It's a subtle evolution rather than a big revolution. So people tend not to notice. If you've got the eyes for it, you can see holistic stuff everywhere. I'm sure you do, Sam. You can see it everywhere, all over the city, all over the country.
I mean, for me, just remembering those days, if you talked about spirituality, mysticism, alternative healing, health, meditation, people looked at you like you had three eyes and that you were from a strange world and everything else. But now, there are yoga centers on like every block in New York City, and there are corporate CEOs talking about meditation. It's no longer, I feel, on the fringe. It may not be at the center of mainstream, but it's no longer at the fringe.
Yeah.
And like you say, it's sort of slowly working its way towards the center.
Yeah, well, I think more and more people see that the holistic ecological worldview which consists of a healthy human future.
Right.
It's not just some weird little trip or some ungrounded new age space cadets who lack the emotional maturity to accept the existential absurdity of the human condition, etc., or the usual projections that there were onto us, or a bunch of hippies or post-hippies. It's a very serious and important part of contemporary culture, and it really does carry the seeds for a healthy future.
So one of the things that kind of sets the Open Center apart, I think, from other places is you sort of the academic rigor. I think you imbue in all the programs that you offer, and this was something sort of very conscious and very specifically decided by you and Walter and the other people involved. Has that rigor evolved or changed over the years, or is it just you have your standards and you've always kept to them, and that's what really sets you apart?
Well, the three watchwords for me in starting the Open Center was that the programs needed to have substance, depth, and integrity. I could have filled the Open Center in the 80s with flaky, ungrounded stuff, but I always felt this is New York City, this is the real world, and I myself have an affinity for deep truth. I think there's just as much danger in an ungrounded spirituality as there is in an extreme materialism. I think we're looking for that middle way.
Right, exactly.
So, you can't keep something going for a third of a century without there being financial pressures, to move in certain directions. And I'm not saying there haven't had to be compromises over the years, but I think the Open Center has always been committed to what you mentioned, because that's what's important. Anybody who goes to somewhere like the Open Center can see these are not uneducated, uninformed people. There are many brilliant people that teach at the Open Center who attend the Open Center. These are not people incapable of intellectual rigor. You want to see that intellectual rigor melded with a sense of soul, and with a sense of openness to the world's mystical and esoteric traditions, and with an engagement towards a social and ecological transformation.
Right. Beautiful. So what was the impetus behind you starting to write your book? You've had so many amazing journeys and so many great stories. You probably could have written like 20 books in your life.
Well, the publisher wanted me to keep it to a certain length. And I think he had good advice. Keep keep it as a personal story, a personal narrative.
Right. But what kind of gave you the push to do
I
it?
just felt, I always felt I should tell this tale. I'm a bit of a, I'm half Welsh, half Irish, and so I'm a natural storyteller.
Yes.
So people have always said to me, you should write it up. And I always had the feeling that I should. And I thought it's a tale, and it can be, hopefully it can be an inspirational tale. Like I say to young people, or people of my own generation, reading it, that you can go against the odds. You can follow your heart. You can stay attuned to your inner spirit, and despite the obstacles and the odds, you can actually make a difference in the world. And so don't give up. When I think of all the young college students now graduating with these huge debts and so on, with all the pressures on them to conform, to get a corporate job and so on, and give up on their creative vision, I think I wanted it to be there as a source of inspiration to people.
Wonderful. Though nowadays I hear, at least because I don't have any kids, but from my friends who have kids, that more and more kids graduating college, because the job market is so bad, more and more of them are becoming entrepreneurs. And so more and more young people are sort of shying away from what was this sort of accepted path when we got out of school, which was you get a corporate job, you work at a company for a while, maybe eventually you start your own business, but not until after you've had a lot of experience. Now young kids, they're less fearful about it. They're starting 2 or 3 side ventures, even when they're still in college. So I think the idea of encouragement to stick with it is a very valuable lesson for people today. And that, it's also, as you said, it's a very personal journey. I think just there's a real lesson in that just because other people found their spirituality through a certain path doesn't mean that has to be your path, and that, we all sort of have unique footprints that lead us in a direction. I have my story, you have your story. Many other people who've sat in this room have had their own stories, and every one of them is different, and none are any better or any worse than any other.
That's right.
They're just like individual expressions of who we are as people, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think everybody has a story to tell, and there are just, people have different gifts, and they can tell it in different ways, and writing happens to be one of my gifts. So I was happy to take that form.
Right. So as you mentioned before about this idea of Finhorn being like the first of sort of a network of global centers. So you'd consider the Open Center another point of light around the world?
And Omega and Esalen Institute and the Canadian Esalen Hollyhock and Auroville in India and so on. We're even getting, I know we have some listeners in China, we're even getting centers, personal growth centers emerging in China. In fact, my book is going to be translated into Chinese. I'm meeting with the translator tomorrow. So it's the first foreign language it's going to be translated into. So,
really? Yeah. That's really significant because usually it's translating foreign language. It's going to be Spanish, French, German, something like that. Nowadays, people look Chinese.
I know, it's pretty amazing.
And like, I think Russian is probably will be the second foreign language, right?
Who knows? But I should mention that, I just came back a couple of weeks ago from the annual gathering of holistic centers, something I've been part of since the very beginning. There's a chapter in the book called the Global Network of Holistic Centers, and it's something that people don't know about, that these centers have been meeting now on a regular basis for a long, long time, even though we're all autonomous. Nevertheless, when we meet together... How many
centers were represented?
Well, there were 40 people at this last one. I'm not sure exactly how many centers there were, maybe 30 or something, or 25 or 30. Mostly from North America, but some from Europe and some from Asia, too. And there's, even though we are all totally independent, when we meet, we recognize immediately we're all doing the same larger work. We're all facets of that diamond. And so there's just a tremendous sense of unity, of brotherhood. Of course, we meet in a spirit of openness, transparency, mutual support, that recognition that we're all part of the greater work of transforming consciousness on the planet. And so, you can hear a lot of abstract terms about the planetization of consciousness or the awakening to a new way of being. But when you go to the annual Holistic Centers gathering, you see it right there, palpably in front of you in living flesh. Here we are, Brighton Bush Hot Springs, Harbin Hot Springs, which was burnt down but is now being rebuilt again, Mount Madonna in the Santa Cruz Mountains of California, all these wonderful centers. We all have our own different angle and perspective. The Open Center is pretty unique, although no longer. We now have one in Quebec City, another urban center. Most of them tend to be retreat centers, but now we have Le Monastère des Augustines in Quebec City that just hosted this, which is the oldest monastery in North America, actually north of Mexico, built in started in 1639. And so, yeah, I think it's a great thing for our listeners to be aware of that there is this global network of centers. And, of course, each person in that room, of how many thousands of people come through each center.
Is there a website for this organization?
Yes, there is. Centersgathering.org. You can spell centers both the British and the American way, E-R-O-R-E, and it'll both come up. Yeah, so that chronicles the ongoing activities of the International Centers Gathering.
Beautiful. All right, time to take our, believe it or not, last commercial break. I see on our live stream, Brigitte, very loyal Brigitte, watching our live stream. Thank you. And we just got a couple of more likes. Thank you all. Please stay tuned, and we'll be right back, and we'll finish up the show.